My daughter didn't raise her voice when she said it. That's what made it worse. You don't really need money anymore, she told me gently, as if she were explaining something obvious to a child. At your age, it's just numbers. Paper. Stress you shouldn't have. We were sitting at my kitchen table. The same table I bought 4 decades ago. The same table where I paid bills, balanced checkbooks, planned holidays, and once helped her with homework when she was too small to reach the counter. I was 74 years old. I was not confused. I was not tired. And yet, in that moment, I was dismissed. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. When you've lived long enough, you learn that statements like that are never complete. There is always a second act. No one tries to take something from you without rehearsing their justification first. She leaned forward slightly, concern carefully arranged on her face. She explained that she only wanted to help. That finances were complicated now. That mistakes happened when people got older. She spoke slowly, clearly, the way people do when they want to sound responsible instead of controlling. I nodded, because I have spent a lifetime nodding while someone younger explains my own life back to me. What she didn't mention was that I had lived in that house since I was 32. That I paid off the mortgage early. That I buried my husband using money we saved together, not borrowed, not begged for. That I had managed accounts, contracts, payroll, taxes, and decisions for nearly 40 years without ever needing her intervention. But there she was, my daughter, with her phone face down beside her coffee cup, explaining my own existence as if it were suddenly fragile. It would just be easier if I helped, she said. At first, just oversight. Making sure everything's okay. Oversight. Then access. Then decisions. She used the word temporary more than once. People always do when they mean permanent. I asked her calmly what she thought I could no longer handle. She smiled. Not kindly. Patiently. Mom, don't make this difficult. That sentence landed harder than anything else she said. After that conversation, I began to notice things I had previously ignored. Documents she wanted me to sign quickly. Appointments she insisted on attending just in case. Little jokes about my memory, always said with a laugh that invited agreement from others. I was not senile. I forgot names sometimes. So does everyone who stares at a screen all day and calls it normal. I didn't argue. I watched. Age teaches you a specific kind of patience. Not the soft kind people admire, but the sharp one you develop after decades of being underestimated. The kind that waits. Observes. Remembers. What my daughter failed to understand was simple. Money was never the issue. Control was. And control, once taken, is almost never returned out of love. I had built my life quietly. I could defend it the same way. That moment at the kitchen table wasn't the fight. It wasn't the court. It wasn't even betrayal. It was the moment I realized that in my daughter's mind, I had already been written off. I had always lived carefully, but never fearfully. People confuse the two. Careful means you know what you have and why you have it. Fearful means you let someone else decide for you. At 74, my days were quiet, but they were not empty. I woke early because my body no longer allowed laziness. I made my coffee strong and unhurried. I read the entire newspaper, not just the headlines. I paid my bills on time, checked my accounts weekly, and kept a small notebook where I wrote down expenses, not because I had to, but because I always had. That notebook bothered my daughter. One afternoon she picked it up, flipped through it, and laughed. You know the bank does all this for you now, right? I know, I told her. I just like seeing my own handwriting. She rolled her eyes the way she used to when she was 16 and thought experience was just another word for being outdated. My money didn't appear by accident. I worked for 38 years at the same manufacturing office. I started as a clerk and left as the person people came to when numbers didn't add up. I wasn't flashy. I saved when others spent. I said no when it wasn't popular. When my husband died suddenly at 61, there was grief, but there was no chaos. The house stayed. The lights stayed on. I stayed standing. That seemed to disappoint her. She began visiting more often after she turned 50. Not for tea. Not for conversation. For check-ins. She opened my fridge without asking. Commented on the temperature in the house. questioned why I needed things the way I liked them. You should really let me handle this, she'd say. This became everything. She asked about my will casually, as if discussing the weather. She suggested simplifying my accounts. She asked if I ever felt confused. Every question was wrapped in concern. And concern, when sharpened long enough, becomes a weapon. I answered calmly. Always calmly. I told her what was already arranged. What was already documented. Which professionals were already involved. Her expression tightened when I mentioned names she didn't recognize. My accountant, my lawyer. People I trusted quietly, without drama. You don't need all that anymore, she said once, irritation slipping through. You should be resting. Resting. As if life ends the moment you stop producing something useful for someone else. I noticed how she spoke about my money as if it were already abstract. Not mine. Not earned. Just something waiting to be reassigned. She never asked what I wanted to do with it. She assumed wanting ended with age. But here's what people forget. When you live long enough, you learn the value of silence. I didn't correct her. I didn't defend myself. I observed the way she leaned forward when finances came up. The way her voice softened when she said, "Trust me." The way she avoided specifics. I wasn't afraid. I was alert. And once you see clearly, you cannot unsee it. The changes didn't arrive all at once. They never do. If they did, even the most trusting person would resist. Instead, they came in pieces, small, reasonable ones, each difficult to argue against on its own. First, she suggested I stop driving long distances. Just until winter passes. Then she offered to do my grocery shopping, even though I told her I enjoyed choosing my own food. She began speaking to service workers on my behalf, stepping slightly in front of me as if I were hard of hearing. I wasn't. My hearing was better than her patience. Then came the paperwork. She brought envelopes already opened, already sorted. These are boring, she'd say lightly. I'll just explain what matters. When I insisted on reading them myself, she sighed, not loudly but deeply. The sigh of someone who believes resistance itself is evidence. She started using we. We should simplify. We don't need multiple accounts. We should prepare for the future. I asked her which future she meant. She laughed and said I was being dramatic. Once, when I took longer than she liked reviewing a document, she leaned back and said, "Mom, this is exactly what I'm talking about." About what? I asked. She didn't answer. She just shook her head, as if my question proved her point. That was when I understood something crucial. She wasn't worried about my confusion. She was frustrated by my independence. The moment she booked a doctor's appointment without asking me, I understood this had crossed a line. It's just a routine checkup, she said, brushing past my objection the way one swats away an inconvenience. At our age, it's better to be proactive. Our age. As if proximity alone had merged our lives into one shared body. She insisted on driving. She insisted on sitting in the room. When the doctor asked me questions, she answered first. When I corrected her, she smiled apologetically at him, the way one indulges someone being difficult. I watched his eyes move between us. So I met his gaze and spoke clearly. Slowly enough to be precise, not slow enough to invite pity. I have learned that clarity unsettles people who expect weakness. In the parking lot afterward, she said, "You didn't have to contradict me like that." I asked her why she spoke for me in the first place. Because I worry, she said. Worry, apparently, now required authority. After that, the calls increased. Sometimes twice a day. Not to ask how I was, but to check, had I paid this, remembered that, followed up on something she insisted we discussed. If I answered too quickly, she narrowed her eyes, like a teacher suspecting a cheat. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone in the next room. She didn't know I could hear her. My name drifted through the air, followed by a lowered voice. She used words like decline and planning realistically. She said, "I just don't want it all wasted." Wasted. I sat very still until the call ended. When I asked who she'd been speaking to, she hesitated just long enough to matter. "Someone from work," she said. "Nothing for you to worry about." That was the moment I stopped pretending this was about care. Love does not erase a person piece by piece. Love does not rush signatures. Love does not resent questions. That night, I lay awake, not from fear, but from calculation. Facts assembled themselves quietly in my mind, like papers laid out on a desk. She believed time was on her side. She believed age had slowed me. What she forgot was this: I had lived long enough to recognize a quiet takeover when I saw one. The first time she said it out loud, I almost missed it. We were in my living room, afternoon light slanting across the carpet. She arrived with a thicker folder than usual and placed it on the coffee table as if it belonged there. "You know," she said casually, tapping the folder, "old people don't really need money the way they used to." She smiled when she said it. Thoughtful. Reasonable. I said nothing. Silence has a way of making people explain themselves. "You have everything you need," she continued. "The house is paid off. Your expenses are minimal. It's not like you're traveling or starting new projects." I asked her what she thought money was for. She blinked. "Security. Comfort." "And who decides how much of that I deserve?" I asked. She waved her hand. "Mom, don't twist my words. I'm being practical. Hoarding money at your age doesn't make sense." Hoarding. An ugly word. One reserved for people who have lost control. I reminded her calmly that I earned what I had. That I still paid my bills. That I had plans, even if they didn't involve airplanes or new wardrobes. She leaned back and smiled. "You're thinking emotionally. That's normal." That was when something inside me cooled completely. "I'm thinking very clearly," I told her. "Clear enough to hear what you're not saying." She frowned. "You've already decided my role has changed," I continued. "That I'm no longer the owner, just the occupant." Her patience cracked. "Why are you turning this into a fight?" "I'm not," I said. "You are." She stood and paced, frustrated, the way she used to when she was younger and didn't like being contradicted. She said I was stubborn. That I was stuck in the past. That the world worked differently now. Then she said it. "Judges don't look kindly on families who don't plan ahead." That word again. Judges. I asked her what she meant. She stopped pacing. Looked at me carefully. "I just don't want things to get messy later." Later, when I'd be quieter. Slower. Easier to speak over. I told her there would be no mess. Everything was already in order. My affairs were none of her concern unless I invited her into them. Her face hardened. "I'm trying to protect you," she said sharply. "From yourself, if necessary." I stood then. Slowly. Calmly. "You don't get to protect me by taking me apart," I said. "And you don't get to decide when my life becomes surplus." She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not confused. Not yielding. She gathered her folder and left without finishing her tea. That evening, I sat alone and replayed every word, not with regret, but with precision. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was positioning. And she had already chosen her side. The next morning, I opened the safe. Not because I was confused. Because I wanted to see my life in facts, not feelings. Deeds. Bank statements. Decades of steady deposits and withdrawals. A will that had been updated properly, witnessed, and reviewed by an attorney who specialized in elder law. I found the folder marked medical and directives. Power of attorney. Living will. Advanced directives. None of them named my daughter. That had been a deliberate choice made years earlier, long before this tension began. Even then, some instinct had warned me that love and authority should not always share the same hands. By noon, the dining table looked like an audit of a life well managed. I felt no panic. Only clarity. That afternoon, I drove myself to my attorney's office. He did not speak slowly to me. He did not ask if I was feeling all right. He asked one question. "What's changed?" I told him everything. Accurately. Without drama. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You're not the first." That sentence settled something deep inside me. He explained the pattern. Adult children mistaking concern for entitlement. Assuming age alone was evidence. Trying to establish control before it was questioned. Competence isn't measured by years, he said. It's measured by proof. I asked him what to expect next. If she's serious, he said, she may try to formally question your capacity. I nodded. I had already suspected as much. We spent the next hour tightening language, reinforcing safeguards, ensuring no single person could override my decisions without process, documentation, and oversight. I signed carefully. Not rushed. Not shaken. When I left his office, the air felt sharp and clear. I sat in my car for a moment before starting the engine. I didn't feel betrayed. Betrayal requires surprise. What I felt was resolved. I did not answer her call that evening. Not because I was afraid of what she would say, but because I was no longer willing to have conversations on her terms. She didn't wait long. Over the next 2 days, messages arrived with careful neutrality, just checking in, hope you're feeling well. Concern polished until it left no fingerprints. On the 3rd day, she came without calling. I heard her car pull into the driveway and felt something familiar tighten in my chest, not fear, recognition. This was escalation. I wiped my hands, walked to the door, and opened it before she could knock. She paused, surprised, then smiled as if we were both performers hitting familiar marks. I was nearby, she said. Of course she was. She stepped inside and immediately scanned the room, her eyes moving the way inspectors do. She noticed the desk. She noticed the single document I had left out deliberately. You didn't answer my call, she said, sitting down without waiting for an invitation. I was busy, I replied. With what? Thinking. Her mouth tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. That sentence again. The anthem of people who want compliance, not understanding. She launched into logistics, doctors, finances, future support. She spoke faster than usual, as if speed itself could outrun resistance. She told me about someone she knew whose mother had declined quickly. She said she didn't want to wait until something went wrong. I asked her what she believed was wrong now. She hesitated. Just a fraction. I think you're vulnerable, she said. Vulnerable. A word that sounds gentle until it's used against you. I told her I had met with my attorney. That everything had been reviewed. That my decisions were documented. That I was protected, and not interested in handing over my life. Her expression changed. You didn't tell me, she said. I didn't need to. She stood and began pacing, sharper now. She said she was my daughter. That she had rights. That she wouldn't forgive herself if she did nothing and something happened. I asked her if she planned to do something. She stopped pacing and looked directly at me. If I have to. There it was. No softness left. That night, I slept lightly. Not anxiously, alertly. There is a difference, and you learn it after 70 years. The next morning, the letter arrived. Not handwritten. Not personal. Official. A notice requesting my presence for an evaluation. Polite language. Neutral tone. Concern wrapped in procedure. I read it twice and folded it carefully. So this was her move. I didn't call her. I called my attorney. This is exactly why we prepared, he said. Don't engage emotionally. Don't explain yourself to her. Show up. Answer clearly. Let the facts speak. Facts had always been my language. In the days that followed, her tone changed. Messages became formal. Her voice sharpened when we spoke briefly. Care turned into responsibility. Responsibility turned into authority. You'll thank me later, she said once. I almost laughed. I gathered what was requested: medical records, financial summaries, letters from professionals who had known me for years. People who spoke to me as a woman, not a liability. On the morning of the evaluation, I dressed carefully. Not to impress. To feel like myself. Navy jacket. Comfortable shoes. Hair brushed the way I'd always worn it. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see someone fading. I saw someone being tested. And I have lived long enough to know this. When someone tries to take your voice quietly, the most powerful thing you can do is answer clearly, without apology. The evaluation itself was brief. Professional. Almost disappointing in its lack of drama. But the real damage came later, when my daughter decided she needed an audience. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was standing in line at the bakery when I heard my name spoken too loudly behind me. I turned. There she was, with her husband, and a couple I barely recognized. She smiled broadly and kissed my cheek. "Mom, you should have told me you were coming out today," she said, guiding me by the elbow as if I needed help walking. I gently pulled my arm away. "I've been coming here every Sunday for 15 years, I said. She laughed. "See? That's what I mean. You forget how long things have been going on." The couple exchanged curious looks. She ordered for me without asking. When I corrected her, she waved it off. "Don't argue, Mom. It's easier this way." At the table, she told stories. Carefully chosen ones. About how I once misplaced my glasses. About how I mixed up dates last Christmas. About how she worries constantly. Each story landed softly, wrapped in concern. Together, they formed a picture I didn't recognize. Then she said it again. "Well, honestly," she sighed, stirring her coffee, "old people don't really need money. It just causes confusion." The silence that followed was brief, but heavy. Her husband nodded. One of the women smiled at me with pity, not kindness. Something settled inside me. I placed my fork down carefully. "You've said that before," I said calmly. "What you've never explained is why you believe my age makes my property yours to manage." Her smile froze. "I didn't say that." "You implied it," I replied. "Repeatedly. And in public." "You're being sensitive." "No," I said. "I'm being precise." Her chair scraped loudly as she stood. "This is exactly why professionals need to be involved," she said, louder than necessary. "You can't even see how this looks." I stood slowly. "This," I said, "looks like a daughter explaining away her mother so she can feel more comfortable." We left separately. That evening, my phone filled with messages, concern disguised as irritation. Accusations dressed up as worry. One line stood out. "People are starting to notice." She was right. Just not in the way she hoped. The next morning, another letter arrived. This one from social services. More questions. More oversight. She was no longer whispering. I made tea and sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she had first spoken over me. I felt no humiliation. What I felt was clarity, sharpened by exposure. She had crossed a line. Not legally yet, but morally, unmistakably. There is something about being publicly diminished that changes a woman of my generation. We were taught to endure quietly. But we were also taught to recognize when silence becomes permission. I gathered my papers again. Not to defend myself. To prepare. If she wanted witnesses, she would have them. If she wanted judges, she would learn how carefully they listen. And if she believed humiliation would make me retreat, she had profoundly misunderstood what 74 years of surviving had taught me. I didn't confront her after the bakery. I didn't send long messages. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't try to correct the story she was already telling. When someone is building a case against you, every emotional reaction becomes material they can use. So I became deliberate. I answered calls only if there was a message first. I replied to texts slowly, briefly, and without tone. Facts only. Dates. Confirmations. Silence, used correctly, is not weakness. It is restraint. I also began documenting everything. Every visit. Every comment. Every helpful suggestion. I wrote down dates, times, locations, witnesses. I saved letters, emails, appointment notices. I did not interpret. I did not embellish. I simply recorded. It felt strange at first, turning my own daughter into a file. But reality does not change because it is uncomfortable. I also sought distance, not from fear, but from clarity. I visited a second attorney, not to replace the first, but to add perspective. Another set of eyes. Another professional voice. He reviewed what I had and nodded slowly. "She's building a narrative," he said. "But it's thin." That word mattered. Thin. He explained how these situations usually unfold. How repetition is often mistaken for proof. How public concern, repeated often enough, begins to sound like truth to outsiders. But courts don't care about impressions, he said. They care about consistency. Consistency was something I had lived by my entire life. I reached out to people who had known me for years, not recently, not suddenly. My long-time doctor. The accountant who had handled my taxes for 2 decades. A neighbor who checked on me weekly, not out of obligation, but friendship. I asked them for written statements. Not opinions. Observations. They were surprised, some of them unsettled, but none hesitated. "You're sharper than most people I know," my accountant said. "I'll put that in writing." At home, I simplified nothing except my expectations. I continued my routines. Shopping. Reading. Walking. Paying bills. I kept every receipt. I balanced accounts manually, then printed digital confirmations to match. Redundancy, I learned long ago, is the language systems understand. My daughter noticed the shift. "You're pulling away," she said during one short call.
No, irraplia.
"I'm standing still." She didn't like that. Another notice arrived. This one more formal. A review hearing. Official language. Structured questions. A date. I read it carefully and placed it in my folder. That evening, I sat alone in the quiet house. I thought about how often I had smoothed things over in the past. How many times I had chosen peace over ground. That habit had kept the family intact. It had also taught my daughter something dangerous. That pressure worked. This time, it wouldn't. The days leading up to the hearing were quieter than I expected. My daughter changed tactics. She stopped accusing and started reminiscing. Old photos. Messages that began with "Do you remember?" She suggested lunch. Just the two of us. I declined politely. "I think it's best we let the process run," I told her. That sentence angered her more than shouting ever could have. Processes remove improvisation. They don't bend for charm. The morning of the hearing I arrived early, not because I was nervous, but because punctuality has always been my quiet way of asserting presence. I dressed simply. Clean lines. Nothing dramatic. I didn't want to look defiant or fragile. I wanted to look accurate. My attorney met me at the entrance and took the folder from my hands. It was thick now. Too thick to dismiss. Inside, the room was smaller than I expected. No raised bench.
No spectacle.
Just a table and a few officials trained to look past stories and into patterns. My daughter sat across from me. She didn't look at me at first. When she finally did, there was something new in her expression. Apprehension. They began with routine questions. Name. Address. Date. I answered clearly. Then came finances. I explained how I managed them, how often I reviewed accounts, who advised me. I named names. Dates. Processes. Each answer landed quietly, like a stamp on paper. They asked about my health. I spoke honestly. I corrected a detail my daughter interjected, without raising my voice. One official raised an eyebrow at her. Then they asked why the review had been requested. She spoke carefully. About concern. About fear. About love. She said she only wanted to help before something went wrong. No one interrupted her. When she finished, one of the officials turned to me. "Do you feel you need assistance managing your affairs?" "No," I said. "Do you feel pressured to relinquish control?" "Yes," I said. The simplicity unsettled her. My attorney presented the documents. Statements. Records. Letters from professionals with no stake in family dynamics. Evidence carries a weight emotion cannot. One official asked my daughter why she hadn't pursued mediation before formal action. She hesitated. "I didn't think it was necessary." That answer didn't land well. The hearing ended without drama. No immediate decision. Just a statement that a ruling would follow. Outside, she confronted me. "You made me look heartless," she said, her voice shaking. "I answered questions," I replied. "That's all." She stared at me as if seeing me clearly for the first time, not as a role, not as a resource, but as an obstacle she had underestimated. A week later, the letter arrived. Brief. Formal. Decisive. No finding of incapacity. No grounds for oversight. No transfer of authority. The request was denied. I read it twice. My hands didn't shake. Judges, I learned, don't listen to who speaks loudest. They listen to who stands steady when asked simple questions. And I had never been steadier. She came 3 days after the letter arrived. Not with flowers. Not with apologies. With anger sharpened into certainty. I saw her car pull into the driveway and felt nothing rise in me.
No dread.
No need to rehearse. Whatever she wanted from me now, the court had already answered. She knocked once, hard, then let herself in the way she used to when she still believed this house belonged partly to her. You didn't have to take it that far, she said before the door had even closed. I was sitting at the table reading. I marked my place and looked up. Neither did you, I replied. She paced the room, restless. You made them think I was some kind of villain. All I did was try to help you. What you did, I said evenly, was question my competence in a formal setting without speaking to me honestly first. I did speak to you, she snapped. You just wouldn't listen. I listened, I said. I didn't agree. She laughed, sharp and bitter. You think this means you've won? I considered the word won. This wasn't a competition, I said. It was a correction. She stopped pacing and looked at me closely, as if searching for the weakness she'd relied on for months. You embarrassed me, she said more quietly. People are talking. Yes, I replied. They are. Her jaw tightened. You could have handled this privately. You made it public, I reminded her. At the bakery. With strangers. With officials. That was different. No, I said. It wasn't. She sank into the chair across from me, suddenly tired. You don't understand how hard this is for me. You're right, I said. I don't. Because I never asked you to manage my life. She stared at the table, then looked up again, defensive lines returning. So what now? She asked. You cut me out? Is that what you want? I thought carefully before answering. Words become structure once spoken. What I want, I said, is clarity. She scoffed. Meaning? My finances remain mine. My decisions remain mine. And if we have a relationship, it will be based on respect, not oversight. You're punishing me. I'm protecting myself. Silence filled the room. The kind that forces truth to surface or retreat entirely. You've changed, she said finally.
No, y raplia.
You just stopped controlling the conversation. She stood, smoothing her coat like she was heading to a meeting instead of leaving her mother's home. Don't expect me to pretend this didn't happen. I don't, I said. I expect you to remember it. At the door, she hesitated. For a moment, I thought she might soften. She didn't. This isn't over, she said. For the court, I replied calmly, it is. After she left, the house felt quieter, but not emptier. I made tea and sat by the window, watching the afternoon fade. I hadn't lost a daughter that day. I had lost an illusion. In its place, I gained something sturdier, the knowledge that my life still belonged fully to me. The weeks that followed were not peaceful in the way people imagine. Peace is often mistaken for silence. What settled over my life was reordering. My daughter didn't disappear. She changed tactics. She began calling relatives, distant ones. People who hadn't visited in years but suddenly felt qualified to weigh in. I received polite calls that began with concern and ended with advice. She means well. She's just worried. You know how things get at your age. At my age, as if years erased facts. I answered kindly and briefly. Arguing invites debate. Debate invites doubt. I stated the truth once and moved on. What surprised me was how quickly narratives spread when money is involved. Not always because people are greedy, but because money gives people permission to imagine stakes where none exist. My daughter told them she was afraid I'd be taken advantage of. She didn't mention that the only person who had tried to redirect my assets was her. I heard that omission from a cousin who still valued accuracy over loyalty. I didn't correct the story publicly. False stories tend to rot when they're not fed. At home, I made changes. Not dramatic ones. Firm ones. I changed the locks, not from fear, but because access should never be assumed. I updated emergency contacts. I reviewed beneficiary designations one final time and added another layer of oversight. Procedural. Neutral.
No anger.
Just structure. I reduced contact, not as punishment, but preservation. When she called, I answered only if I felt steady enough to remain factual. Otherwise, I let it ring. I stopped explaining myself. Explanations had become her raw material. One afternoon, she sent a long message. Strategic. Carefully worded. She wrote about feeling shut out. About family coming first. About judges not understanding emotional realities. I read it twice, then set the phone face down. Judges understand reality very well. That's why they require evidence. I replied the next day with one sentence. If you want to rebuild trust, it starts with respecting my decisions, not questioning my capacity. She didn't respond. Time passed. A month. Then 2. The calls stopped. The concern dried up. Without constant reinforcement, the narrative lost momentum. Life has a way of correcting exaggeration through boredom. One morning, I noticed something unexpected. I felt lighter. Not triumphant. Unburdened. My routines returned to being routines instead of evidence. I cooked because I was hungry, not because I needed to prove something. I paid bills because they were due, not because someone was watching. Control, once reclaimed, doesn't announce itself. It simply stops asking permission. Near the end of summer, my daughter called again. Her voice sounded different, lower, careful, worn down at the edges. I don't know how to talk to you anymore, she said. I believed her. Then listen, I replied. There was a long pause on the line. Not the awkward kind. The kind where someone realizes they no longer control the direction of the conversation. I didn't think it would go this far, she said quietly. Neither did I answered. But you kept pushing. She didn't apologize. Not fully. But she didn't accuse me either. That was something. We ended the call without resolution, but also without threat. And that was when I understood something important. Closure is not required for progress. Sometimes boundaries are enough. A week later, another envelope arrived. Neutral language. Official tone. This one wasn't about capacity. It was about review. Whether the earlier decision should be reconsidered due to ongoing family concerns. That phrase told me everything. She hadn't accepted the ruling. She had reframed it. I didn't panic. Panic belongs to people unsure of their footing. I knew exactly where I stood, and why. I called my attorney and read the notice aloud. She's hoping repetition will change the outcome, he said. It won't. But we'll respond properly. Judges don't like being asked the same question twice unless something material has changed. And nothing had. In the weeks before the second hearing, my daughter tried again, this time with nostalgia. She sent photos from years ago. Childhood birthdays. Holidays long past. Messages began with, "Do you remember?" I declined invitations. Politely. Consistently. "I think it's best we let the process finish," I told her. That sentence irritated her more than confrontation ever had. Process removes emotion from the equation. The day of the second hearing, I felt calm in a way that surprised even me. Not numb. Clear. My daughter sat farther away this time. Her lawyer did most of the speaking. Words like continued concern and family tension filled the room. He suggested unresolved conflict itself was evidence of instability. That argument did not land. When it was my turn, I spoke again, clearly, steadily, consistently. The same facts. The same records. The same voice. Consistency is the hardest thing to fake. One of the judges turned to my daughter and asked why she had pursued another review. She hesitated. "I'm afraid she's isolating herself," she said. "From whom?" the judge asked. She glanced at me. "From family." The judge nodded once and turned back to me. "Are you isolated?" "No," I said.
I'm selective.
There was a pause. Considered. Not awkward. Another judge asked whether I felt coerced, neglected, or financially exploited.
No, irraplia.
On the contrary. That word shifted the room. The ruling came quickly this time.
No delay.
No further review. The previous decision stood. The matter was closed. Outside, my daughter stopped me again. Not angry. Something closer to wounded pride. They believed you, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. Because I told the same truth every time. She looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time I saw uncertainty where entitlement had lived. I was just trying to help, she said. I know, I answered. But help without consent becomes control. She didn't argue. We parted without an embrace. Without a scene. Two women walking in different directions, finally understanding the distance between them. That evening, I placed the final court letter into the folder and closed the safe. Some lessons, once documented, don't need repetition. I made dinner. Washed the dishes. Sat down with a book I'd been meaning to finish. The house felt like mine again. Not because it ever stopped being so, but because no one was questioning it anymore. After the second ruling, something in my daughter finally fractured. Not loudly. Not in a way that invited sympathy. Quietly. She stopped calling. Not for days, weeks. At first, I waited out of habit, not hope. Mothers learn to anticipate needs long before they're spoken. That reflex doesn't disappear overnight. But slowly, it loosened. Mornings passed without my phone lighting up. Afternoons ended without the familiar tension of wondering which version of her would appear next. The silence didn't feel punitive. It felt clean. People asked if it hurt. Of course it did. Loss doesn't vanish simply because it was necessary. But pain and regret are not the same thing. I didn't regret protecting myself. What surprised me was how much space appeared once the noise stopped. I could think again. Not defensively. Not strategically. Honestly. I noticed small things I'd been too tense to register before. How sunlight settled across the floor in the late afternoon. How my joints ached less when I wasn't bracing myself. How meals tasted better when they weren't eaten under quiet evaluation. Control, I realized, had been costing me more energy than I admitted. I returned to my attorney one final time, not because something was wrong, but because I wanted to finish properly. He asked a simple question. Do you want to change your will? I thought about it longer than I expected. I didn't want revenge disguised as planning. I didn't want to erase my daughter out of anger. But I also refused to reward behavior that had nearly stripped me of my autonomy. We adjusted things carefully. Thoughtfully. Proportionately. Not as punishment. As consequence. When I signed the final documents, my hand was steady. I didn't tell my daughter about the changes. She had taught me, after all, how information can be used as leverage. Silence, when chosen freely, is simply privacy. Autumn arrived gently. Leaves gathered on the porch, and I swept them without rushing. Neighbors waved. One stopped by with a loaf of bread and stayed for tea. Life continued, not triumphantly, not dramatically. Sturdily. Then one evening, my daughter called. Her voice was different again. Tired. Less certain. I heard you updated your estate, she said. I did, I replied. You didn't tell me. No, I said. I didn't. There was a long pause. I'm still your daughter, she said, as if reminding me of something I might have forgotten. I know, I answered. That's why this hurts. She inhaled sharply. You don't trust me. I trust you to be who you've shown me, I said. And I've adjusted accordingly. She was silent. I never wanted to hurt you, she said finally. I believe that, I replied. But intention doesn't erase impact. We ended the call without resolution, but I didn't feel the need for more. Some conversations land where they need to. Winter came early that year. Sharp. Decisive. I welcomed it. Cold clarifies. My daughter didn't visit. She didn't call. Weeks turned into months, and something inside me settled further into place. I stopped waiting for reconciliation shaped like apology. I stopped rehearsing conversations that might never happen. Acceptance, I learned, is not agreement. It's the decision to stop arguing with reality. Life grew smaller in the best way. Warm cups of tea. Books with cracked spines. Slow walks that reminded me my body still answered when I listened to it. Once a week, I volunteered at the library. Shelving books. Helping children find stories. No one questioned my competence there. No one spoke over me. They asked. I answered. It was enough. In January, I received a card. No return address. Inside, my daughter had written only a few lines. I hope you're well. I'm trying to understand things from your perspective. I don't know how yet. I read it twice and placed it in a drawer. Understanding can't be rushed. In early spring, she finally came. She stood on the porch longer than necessary before knocking. When I opened the door, she looked thinner. Tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. For a moment, we just looked at each other. May I come in? She asked. Yes, I said. Nothing more. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she had once spoken about money as if it were something I no longer deserved. She didn't bring folders this time. No documents.
No rehearsed arguments.
I didn't realize how much of your life I was trying to manage, she said finally. I thought I was being responsible. I know, I replied. That's what made it dangerous. She flinched, but she didn't argue. I was afraid, she admitted, of losing you. You don't prevent loss by creating it, I said gently. She nodded. I don't expect things to go back to how they were, she said. They can't, I answered. And they shouldn't. She looked up. Is there any way forward? I considered her carefully. There is, I said. But it won't involve my money, my decisions, or my capacity being up for discussion. She nodded slowly. I can try. Trying isn't enough, I said. Respect is required. She swallowed and nodded again. We spoke for another hour, about ordinary things. Books. Weather. Her work. Nothing that gave either of us leverage. When she left, she hugged me briefly. Carefully. I didn't rush to label the visit. Some bridges aren't rebuilt. They're replaced with paths that require more walking, and fewer assumptions. Spring returned slowly. Not with celebration, but with permission. Windows opened. Curtains lifted. The house breathed again. I noticed how much air I had been holding inside myself without realizing it. My daughter and I did not suddenly become close. We became careful. And sometimes, careful is the most honest form of love two people can manage. She called once a week. Sometimes twice. The conversations stayed light. Weather. News. Small complaints. Nothing about finances. Nothing about decisions. When she drifted too close to those edges, I redirected gently, and she followed. That mattered. Trust doesn't rebuild in declarations. It rebuilds in restraint. I did not change my estate again. Not because I was rigid, but because stability is part of dignity. My choices stood, not as punishment, but as record. I wanted my life to end the same way it was lived, clearly. People often ask me now if I'm afraid of getting older. I tell them no. I am afraid of being erased before I'm gone. Age does not remove a person's right to agency. It sharpens it. Time teaches you what matters, and what should never be surrendered quietly. What surprised me most was not how close I came to losing control. It was how easily it might have happened if I had been less attentive. If I had apologized for being capable. If I had accepted concern as proof. If I had confused love with obedience. The system didn't save me. Preparation did. Consistency did. My refusal to disappear politely did. I keep my documents organized now, not out of fear, but clarity. My instructions are written plainly. My boundaries are spoken once, and honored. The people who remain in my life understand this. Those who don't, drifted. That was not a loss. One afternoon, I stood in the garden and watched my granddaughter, my daughter's child, play in the grass. She asked me to show her how to plant seeds. I knelt slowly and showed her where to dig, how deep to place them, how to cover them gently. Will they grow? She asked. Yes, I said. If you don't pull them up to check every day. She nodded seriously, as if I had shared a secret. I smiled. My daughter watched from the porch. She didn't interfere. She didn't correct me. She didn't explain. She trusted me to teach. That, more than any apology, told me we had moved forward. I am 74 years old. I still read the newspaper from front to back. I still write things down. I still choose my own groceries. I still decide what happens to what I earned. And when the time comes, when I am ready to let go, it will be because I choose to, not because someone else decided I was finished. That is what I kept. Not just money. Not just a house. My voiced my authority. My life.